Greetings, Aris. It's your favorite server owner and GM here trying something different. Hopefully in the future this will just be an embarrassing first time, but it's obviously the first time that I am making a video like this. Just get right into it and leave the awkward intros behind. Today we're here to talk about Wild Zones. This will be just one of a few videos where we can go over some things going on the server and hopefully get people acquainted in a much easier way than having to do a bunch of reading. Without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so what is a wild zone? Well, they're kept on the sidebar of the server with the rest of our channels, and we've organized them to go hand in hand with each other so you know what's what. So as you can see on the sidebar, you have a circle with a dot for a city, a flower for a wild zone, and a star for any major city like Del Salona up there. But let's talk a bit more about what wild zones are in specific now that we know where they're kept. Wild zone are exclusively something for A5, while they're most comparable to the travel system of old iterations. Here they function as something unique and different at the same time. Rather than needing to travel through an exclusive area at any given moment in order to get from one place to the next, players have a little bit more freedom with getting around, especially because of agencies, which we can talk about later. But these wild zones are explorable areas that offer their own unique interactions, as opposed to just something you have to get through and sludge through an encounter for. Let's talk about the primary differences for a second here. City channels and other civilization locations are going to be primarily places where you interact with other players and their characters. And in some of them, or even most of them, just to a lesser extent, you're going to have the availability to interact with a GM. And that'll trigger some sort of event built around the core plot of A5. In contrast to that, in a wild zone, it's reversed. The primary goal of a wild zone is to interact with the GM in some sort of plot-related event or just something that enhances your understanding of the setting. Unlike in previous travel systems, if you go into a wild zone, you are going to get an encounter. In fact, if you don't get an encounter, it's mostly because you didn't meet a certain requirement in order to trigger that encounter based on either what the bot that's set up in that area requires or based on what I have in my notes. Very rarely will it ever just be RNG that gets you no encounter, unlike in previous travel systems where you would use a travel command and then have a chance of getting an encounter where the GM just made something up on the spot. This iteration is built around a core series of mysteries and conflicts that you will have access to explore. The only thing that will stop you from exploring them is either not being in the place to explore it or not having the right sort of equipment, renown, or other qualifying factors. Let's take a look at an example. This is Plume Altar in northern Sereda. It's a pretty well-known spot even in areas outside of this country, so there are a lot of reasons why people would be able to access it. But it's in a wild zone because it doesn't have enough area or people around it to sustain being a civilization channel, or category rather, and also it is surrounded by wilderness. The path to get there is just one little road and a lot of mountains, forests, and other natural things to slug through. So, in order to simulate that, you have to get there through a wild zone. Of course, you don't have to walk through all the channels of a wild zone to get to Plume Altar. In fact, if you just enter the wild zone for El Norte, where this is located, you can just go right to Plume Altar. And once you're there, you can do whatever you want. But it is always advised that in every channel, not just in every wild zone, but in every wild zone especially, you should check the channel's description. That's where I make sure to put all the necessary details of where you are. Here we are. So at Plume Altar here, we see a brief description of what the place is, things that everyone would know, and you can have access to using that as your character. But as we can also see in that last line there, it says players can use the command for plume here. So if you were to type that in, you'd get a certain response. And checking these descriptions is the best way to make sure that you never miss any sort of hidden gem for your sake of your adventure while you're out there in the wild zones. If you go into that channel and use the prompted command, you'll get a response from one of our bots that will allow you to get further information or prompt you with some sort of roleplay starting message. These messages can range from anywhere from a little bit of gossip that you could use repeatedly, or from a one-time use prompt that once it's done has nothing more to be said. In those locations, if you're the first person to get it, you're going to get the best source of information available, so there is a benefit to being the one to adventure places that aren't seen all that often. Of course, I'm not going to show you what this command does right now because that's for you to discover on your own, but suffice to say, all of these channels in wild zones have something for you to do, and if they don't have a command, there is something not as one note that I'll be able to give you as your GM in any given encounter. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is what it's like inside an actual wild zone. There are wild zones like Plume Altar that are just places that you can be, and there are also wild zones that are more, well, wild. Fields, forests, rivers, things of that nature. These wild zones, because they all share a category and a categorization for that matter, can vary wildly in how exactly they're explored. Some of them are a lot larger than others. Some are just a tower. Some are an entire field that could take weeks to travel. So they vary in terms of danger from place to place. Because of this, if you're not prepared for the wilderness, you probably don't want to go alone, unless you're sure you can handle it. Bringing a buddy has no drawbacks, other than maybe response times because we're real people role-playing with real people. But ultimately, it's better safe than sorry in most scenarios. Even the strongest adventurers can be outdone in this iteration. You really have no idea what's lying in wait around any corner. On that topic, another good idea is stocking up for anything you could need at an agency. Of course, they're not going to have everything, but they do have a hefty chunk. And as long as you have an agency voucher, which all of you do as long as you select a path when you make a character, you can get pretty much anything you need to at least start up. On that note, you may already be aware of the paths we have for this iteration, inclusive of both the Contador and the Adventurer. The Adventurer is geared pretty much explicitly toward surviving in wild zones, whereas the Contador is pretty much geared toward gaining lore. Both of these things go hand in hand, however, and by the way, with all things that you have an end goal for, diversifying the people you party with to get to the end goal is always better than just going it alone. Having someone with extensive information and having someone with gear to help them survive the wild and having someone who is an experienced warrior, well, those all help each other out pretty well, I say. You can think of it like building a party in an RPG. At the end of the day, that's pretty much what this is. We're role-playing, and it's been gamified for the sake of exploration. So the more of a diverse party that you have with people who can benefit from each other's strengths, the better. You don't need someone from every path, and you don't need more than just another person with you if you really don't want to be slugged down, and you don't need anyone at all if you don't want to be slugged down. But at the end of the day, it benefits everyone involved. So you should consider if you want to take on some of the more challenging wild zones, which, trust me, you'll discover they're challenging pretty quickly, you might want to get some friends together. Even if only every once in a while. You can take on some quests alone, and when you know you're out of your depth, grab someone and take them with you. One other factor to consider is renown. I mentioned it earlier, but what it really means is how well known your character is in the scene of achieving something. Even if your character is relatively famous otherwise, they might not be famous in the right way for a certain NPC to crack open and tell you what you need. So buddying up always gives you the benefit of the fact that if you're traveling with someone of more renown, they might have some influence toward people. And the only time where you're going to have a completely fruitless engagement in a wild zone is if you don't meet the renown requirement. That's usually the only thing to stop you. You can earn renown by completing quests on the bulletin, which I've divided by duchy for the sake of not making someone go all the way across the map just to save a kitten. I track renown personally on a private document where I've listed every character who earns at least 1 renown. And I check that every time they're in an encounter where I have an NPC with a secretive renown requirement. Some have it at 0, some have it as little as 1, some have it as high as 10, 12, or 15. Some even roll your renown as a percentage chance to talk to you. So, it's worth enough. If you're an adventurer, you should take on a bounty every now and again. To access a wild zone, all you need is its according role. You may have to select that channel category, though, from the drop-down menu in the server guide, or wherever the heck Discord tells you to do it these days. At the end of the day, though, there are 15 counties in Sereda, and all those are listed in our roles channel on the lore sidebar, with a highlighted area that lets you know the entirety of that county. You can also tell in the description exactly what categories encapsulate that area. For example, here with the Marso of Ganon, we have the Asirelta city category and the Wild Zone of Ganon. If you have any further questions, feel free to make your way over to the Questions and Concerns channel, and I'll be happy to help you. But that's all I got for you right now. Feedback is always appreciated, so let me know what I did right and what I could do better with videos like this in the future. And of course, if you like them, just let me know. I'm happy to do things for you guys that are easier. I want to accommodate everybody, so just let me know. At any rate, thanks for wasting your time with me, and I hope you get out there and get wild.